Now to Britain, and campaigners are raising the alarm on behalf of the nearly 1 million children who live in poverty in the UK. Rising inflation has driven a growing number of families to the brink in the last couple of years, and now with national elections on the horizon, the next government is being urged to make the cost of living crisis their #1 priority.
Behind London's glittering facade, there is a lot of hidden hardship. Poor and rich live side by side. Greenwich is located in South London and is one of the poorest communities in England. Many here feel that their surroundings, the entire country, are in a state of crisis.
I'm a single mum and I work 2 jobs, and I'm just trying to pay nursery fees as well as school fees and then keep in private rent. Like, everything is so expensive.
People are worried and they're counting the pennies, and it's very hard for everyone now.
People spend so much time and effort trying to pay rent and paying to live that they actually can quite often lose sight of their real goals and what they really want to be doing.
Charities are warning that prices for food, energy and rent have increased dramatically, while incomes have not. But it's not just those on the breadline that are feeling the pinch. With inflation just coming down from a 41-year high, Britain's cost of living crisis is also hitting the middle classes. Many people are now dependent on food banks. Families with children are often especially vulnerable.
We've seen a really steep rise in the number of people being forced to turn to food banks just to survive. So over the last 5 years, the number of emergency food parcels we've provided has nearly doubled. Last year, it was a record 3.1 million emergency food parcels. So that's an incredibly worrying rise in the number of people who just haven't got enough money to afford the essentials.
Poverty can affect everyone. That's what Val McKee wants to draw attention to. After her husband died, the freelance management consultant lost her apartment and became dependent on food banks.
So much in the middle class is hidden, and there will be an awful lot of people struggling today for whom, like myself, going to ask for help is just almost like the worst possible thing that you could do. It's about what it does to you, sort of emotionally and psychologically. Because it's very scary. It's a very scary and shameful place to be.
Many here feel abandoned by politicians.
I think they live in a different world. They don't see what's going on underneath. They hear it, they don't see it, they hear it, but they're not acting accordingly.
I think they get their lunch in the House of in the Palace of Westminster. I think they have plenty of expenses that they can claim. I don't think they have a clue.
The people in Greenwich feel left alone with their everyday problems. Hardly anyone here seems to have any hope that the upcoming election will change anything.
And DW's Birgit Maas, who filed that report, joins us now from London. Birgit, your report focused on poverty in the UK. Is that a decisive issue in this week's election there?
Surprisingly, it's actually not, Terry. So the Conservatives are promising that they will cut taxes. They're not promising to put more money into social welfare. Even the opposite, they want to cut it more. They want to encourage more people, or others, critics might say, force more people to get into work. And the Labour Party are also emphasising that they want to grow the economy. The parties are acknowledging that there is a cost of living crisis, but their emphasis is not on helping poor people. It's more to get the ailing British economy back on track.
Now, Labour is expected to win this election by a landslide. Is that because Labour have more convincing policies and candidates, or are voters just fed up with the Conservatives?
Voters are definitely dissatisfied with British politicians. I mean, when I've spoken to people on the street and I try to engage them in political conversations about leaders, a lot of them said they are just as bad as each other. So there is an all-time high, also what the polls are showing, of dissatisfaction with British politicians. Now, the Conservative Party have been in power for 14 years. So experts say, they look at elections and they say that's really quite often a natural end. It's a long time, a long stretch to be in power. So there is a natural end to it. However, the Conservatives have also created some crises of their own making. Boris Johnson was perceived as a very inept, not very competent prime minister. We had Liz Truss, Conservative prime minister, for a very short time because she crashed the British economy. So these are homemade crises. On top of that, of course, we've had the Ukraine war that drove up inflation. We've had COVID. So a lot of factors are coming together where voters are saying, this really has to stop and we need something else, not because they particularly love Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, but because they really want something different.
It's highly likely that the Labour Party's leader, Keir Starmer, will be the next Prime Minister. What can you tell us about him, Birgit?
Again, when I tried to engage people on the streets and ask them how would you characterize him, it was not very easy to get something out of them. Boring is one word that people do say about Keir Starmer, but also on the more positive side, he has the reputation of being somebody who is competent. He was, turning to his biography, he was born in a working class family. His dad was a toolmaker. That's something that he very often actually also emphasizes because it's a contrast to Rishi Sunak, who's one of the wealthiest men in the country. He studied law and then rose through the ranks and headed the British Crown Prosecution Service and was knighted by then Prince Charles. So he's had a career before he started politics, and his reputation is as being somebody who is more managerial. He's not somebody who comes up with great visions. His biographer says that he will go about running the country like a lawyer, sort of diligently, slowly building blocks, smaller reforms, but not the grand visions.
Birgit, thank you so much. Good to see you. That was our correspondent, Birgit Maas, in London.
Now let's bring in Stuart Lansley. He is an economist, journalist and currently a visiting fellow at the University of Bristol's School of Policy and joins us from London. Stuart, you have written that the top tenth of Britons now holds nearly half of the UK's private wealth. The poorest half share, meanwhile, has never exceeded 1/10. How did it get this bad?
Well, Britain has been a high poverty, high inequality country for centuries. The only time that that has been broken was in the post-war years, when we had sort of egalitarian policies, when the wealth and income gap narrowed and poverty rates fell. Britain today, roughly 30% of children, that's 4.3 million children, are in poverty in Britain on the official definition. This is more than double the rate in the 1970s and is significantly higher than most other rich nations. Yet, I mean, these are very big issues, as you presented in your report. But the general election campaign of the last few weeks has barely mentioned the issues of inequality and poverty. And we don't really have any indication as to whether this is going to be a major political issue in government.
That leads me straight to my next question, that in the elections, turnout is expected to be low. Has inequality, also referring back to what you just said, has inequality become so ingrained in Britain's DNA, if you will, that it's lost all power to mobilize voters or campaigners, really?
Yes, I think there is something in that. It's such a big problem that I think, governments find it very... Well, I think there are two reasons why it's not really a political issue. I mean, the first is the problem is so big and the solutions are complex. But more significantly, I think we've handed over the power to very rich, powerful groups in society that really don't want any changes. The only way we're going to tackle poverty in this country is not by a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of sort of edging up of benefits and so on. It's by a whole-scale transformation in the way the economy works. We essentially have an economy that is very, very biased to inequality. And trying to reverse that will, of course, have to challenge a lot of the big vested interests, the big financial companies, the big corporations, the billionaire classes. And politicians sort of shy a little bit away from that.
Yeah, you can say that. Labour has already ruled out raising taxes, including on the wealthy. And Rachel Reeves, who's expected to become the next Chancellor, that's the finance minister, has said she doesn't see, quote, the way to prosperity as being through taxation. Now, how's Labour planning to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots then?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is that we don't know. There's very little in Labour's manifesto. I mean, that sets out a programme to cut poverty and reduce the level of inequality. This is the Labour Party has traditionally, of course, been a party of equality. It was born to fight inequality in the turn of the last century, and from 1945. It made a number of progressive social reforms. I mean, similar reforms happened across Europe as well, that made Britain a much more equal country. But since then, we've had this sort of transformation in governing philosophy that's been embraced by all parties, that a certain degree of inequality is necessary for economic progress. And we shouldn't interfere too much with market mechanisms. But those policies, that strategy that was meant to deliver faster economic growth has basically failed. It hasn't delivered growth. It's just made Britain a much more unequal country. And it's basically meant that the living standards of, the bottom third in Britain have a pretty well stagnated over the last 2 to 3 decades, while the gap between top and bottom has widened. If we are going to tackle it, we need some very transformative policies that unfortunately don't seem to be on the agenda at the moment.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Stuart Lansley there, thank you very much.
Thank you.